Welcome back to the Rad Lab podcast. I am Dr. David Dan here with Dale Enzer, and today we're going to be talking about the women of the Manhattan Project. We would like to highlight a few of them in this one. So take us away, Dale.
Well, the first one that I'll talk about is Leona Marshall, and who eventually last name was Libby. Leona Marshall received her B.S. in chemistry at the University of Chicago, and then was studying for her Ph.D. under Robert Millikan. At this time, the Manhattan Project moved to Chicago, and half of her physics building was then walled off, and she couldn't go in there. And she made friends with a number of the young scientists that were involved in the Manhattan Project, mainly because they found out that she knew where things were buried in the building, and when they needed something, they would come to her. She also became very good friends with Enrico Fermi and his wife. Fermi asked her to teach him United States, and he would teach her physics. She eventually received her PhD in physics and was hired by the Manhattan Project and worked on Chicago Pile No. 1. It was the only female involved in Chicago Pile No. 1. And her skill was glass blowing. And she made the neutron detectors that were used, which are glass tubes filled with boron trifluoride. And she made those for the CP1.
She did quite a lot in that span of time, like getting her PhD, designing blowing the glass for the neutron detectors, which is kind of crazy to think. And having and glass blowing is really a dying art too, like nowadays at least. But
yes,
back then it was a pivotal skill to have as a scientist, really.
She also worked with the scientists, even though they didn't want her in the building where they were machining the graphite blocks. When they were machining the graphite blocks, the dust went everywhere and everybody became colored black with graphite. And so she was able to sneak in and start working in there, but they really didn't want her in there. But because they if she were there, they felt like they couldn't cuss.
Oh. So
and evidently there were several of them that had very good language skills in that area, and were somewhat embarrassed when they'd found that she was there.
So initially she wasn't part of the Manhattan Project.
Right.
Was there pushback for women being put into the Manhattan Project?
I think there was, in just the limited number of women with high scientific training, because immediately once she finished her PhD, she immediately was hired.
Oh, okay, yeah. So it's good to see that they didn't really care, didn't have any reservations about that.
Well, she became real good friends with Herbert Anderson and with Fermi. She eventually measured John Marshall. She married him in 1943. He was another physicist with CP1. Mm-hmm. And they ended up spending the rest of the war at Hanford, monitoring the B reactor and the production of plutonium.
Wow, so had a very big hand
right.
in all of this.
Yes. Yeah. Also, Leona Marshall Libby wrote a book called The Uranium People, and I highly recommend that. She tells about her life with the Manhattan Project.
Uranium People, that's a good one.
Yeah. Another area to talk about is Oak Ridge, and more specifically Y-12. Now, everybody's heard about the Calutron girls, but there were also women who came there with degrees. One name in particular is Jane Greer. She was from Paris, Tennessee, and she had worked in high school to do all the proper classes and so forth, and went to the Knoxville, to the University of Tennessee to become an engineer. she was taken out of the engineer line because they only taught males.
Oh.
And instead, she was put into math and statistics. When Y12 started, it provided a new pathway for women to receive what at that time were very good wages. Jane started out at $35 a week, and with overtime would add another $15, and that was a real good salary. Yeah. Now, as a statistician, she quickly rose in the ranks from the Calutron girls to overseeing all the data that was coming in terms of the separation factors of uranium-235 with uranium-238.
Wow.
And she oversaw that area near the end. She wasn't the boss. The boss, of course, was a male, but she was really the one that kept the figures straight.
Yeah, doing all the real work.
Yes. Another woman that mentioned was Virginia Spivey. Now, she came from Lewisburg, North Carolina. Again, hearing that there were jobs to be had. She had a chemistry degree from the University of North Carolina. When she showed up and was accepted into the employment there at what was then called the Clinton Engineering Works, she sat for a while because they didn't know what to do with her, and she ended up teaching some of the young ladies that were coming through how to write, how to spell their names, and then began to teach basic math to them. They finally realized that she had a background in chemistry, and so she was assigned to the bulk treatment plant, and she worked in there separating what they called gunk, which was actually the uranium material that didn't get separated. And so they didn't lose anything. They reprocessed that and sent it back through again. But she, again, one of the reasons she got there was for the money. They worked 6 days a week, 8 hours a day, without break, and generally were not allowed off-site once the women were housed in dormitories. So it was not a
glamorous. A glamorous living.
Right. Yeah.
So what is the state of radiation safety at this point? Because for women, you have to be a little bit more cautious for radiation safety because of reproductive purposes and things like that. Did they understand, or did they care, or did they not know?
It was in its infancy. They realized that if the female were pregnant, that they should not be exposed to any radiation. However, the safety aspect was not nearly as prominent because we were at war, and the idea is we doing whatever we can to win.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of stories of people, like, they knew some of the dangers of radiation, but they didn't care because that was their duty and the price they were paying for the war effort.
Right.
And
they weren't getting shot at.
Yes, exactly. So do you think because of the war effort and so many men that went off to war, this opened a lot of doors for women during this time?
Exactly. That's especially true for Y12. And initially, they didn't think that the Calitron girls would most of these girls had only high school education. They may have been a waitress or something like that, but this offered them really an opening to a much better salary. They were able to send that money home. A lot of them sent most of the money home because their brothers or fathers were off to war and weren't earning money for the home place. That brings us to Los Alamos, and one of the names I'll bring up is Charlotte Serber. Now, she was the wife of Robert Serber, who had been a postdoc with Oppenheimer and had participated in the summer colloquium that they had, which began to devise the theory of the development of the weapon or the gadget. Serber was actually the one that gave the Los Alamos primer, the lecture that sort of set the stage as to what was going on at that time. Anyway, Charlotte was one of the first women that got on site, and one of the comments was it was not a Shangri-La. But most of the young women that came, and most of the women and young husbands and wives were in their 20s. And so the young women were then immediately put to work because there was need for people on the hill, so to speak. And so Charlotte was designated as the technical librarian. And initially she had no books at all. She began to order journals and books, but these were shipped to a address in Los Angeles, and then came to Santa Fe, and then finally to the Hill. So she began to collect and build up. She was also in charge of the secret material. And so initially there was only one locked filing cabinet, and that was in Oppenheimer's office. But then eventually they began to accumulate. But she realized that the scientists were not being very good about locking away top secret information.
It's not surprising.
And so she began with a number of her associates would go around at night looking for top secret information just left out.
Yeah.
And if they found it, they would take it and lock it up so that when the person needed it again, they'd have to come to the technical librarian and say, I need this. Yeah. And but then she started fining them, and if they didn't want to pay the fine, then they had to become one of the people to go around and look for top secret information.
Smart.
And evidently, it was a very good process that it raised the level.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah.
Now, one of the tales she told was that Oppenheimer, when they originally in '43 people started going up on the Hill, he wanted to sort of get the people down in the valley in Santa Fe, give them a false idea of what was going on up there. And so he told Charlotte that you and your husband and another couple, John Manley and his wife, wanted them to go down to Santa Fe, spend the evening, go to La Fonda, have drinks, talk loudly, try to spread it out that they were making rockets for submarines or electric rockets. He didn't really care. They just wanted some sort of false idea.
Yeah.
And so Charlotte said that their efforts were unfound. They found no fertile ground. Said that they went to La Fonda and had drinks, talked loudly. No one was interested. And then she was dancing with a local, and she tried to get him started talking about, do you know what's going on up in the hill? And he said, I don't care. And she finally said something, and he said, I just wanted to dance with a pretty girl.
Oh.
So their efforts at being a spy were she said they were no good at that.
Yeah, they're just kind of minding their own business, I guess.
One of the other, there were some other women at Los Alamos that I'll just mention. Edna Anderson was a PhD in physics from the University of Wisconsin, and she measured, she came with the accelerator that Wisconsin sent to the lab, and she measured some of the fission properties of 235 uranium and actually prepared the first pure sample of uranium-235 metal. She often worked, they said she worked 16 hours a day, and contrary to norms at that time, she wore jeans and a flannel shirt. Another is Frances Dunn. She was an explosive technician and was the only female in the explosive division. And they pointed out that her small hands gave her an advantage because she was able to get hands into mock-ups of the bomb and work and see how things were put together and make sure that they were put together correctly. But she came from a background of explosive technician in the oil industry.
Oh, makes sense.
Another was Lily Horning. Now, Horning, she was the wife of Horning, who was recruited from Harvard, but she had a master's degree in chemistry, and when she first came in, they were going to put her as a secretary teach her how to use the switchboard for the phone, and her husband immediately said, no, we are a package deal. And so she ended up determining the solubility of various plutonium salts and was critical fundamental studies.
Yeah, good husband there.
Yeah, he was the one that babysat the bomb overnight. At Trinity site. Now, at Los Alamos, there were a large number of women who were from the Women's Army Corps. There were well over 400 that took various positions, both as secretaries and clerks and switchboard operators, but also as technicians and scientists. Now, one of those actually came from Livingston, Tennessee. Her name was Lyda Speck. And Lyda worked at Los Alamos from 1943 to 1946. And I was fortunate to catch an article in the newspaper about her in which she talked about her experiences. But she had a chemistry degree from a small college in Johnson City, Tennessee, and had taught school for 3 years, but then switched and took a job with the Postal Service. She had a rural free delivery route. But anyway, in 1943, when it was developed and the Army asked for women volunteers, she volunteered, and she was in basic training when she was asked, are you willing to go overseas for the duration of the war without any chance of going home? And in which she said yes. And she, as a result, she gave up a chance to go to officers' candidate school and a chance to earn more money. But because she was willing to go overseas and not go home for the duration, that opened her up to going to Los Alamos. Now, before she went to Los Alamos, she had to have a background check, and so the FBI showed up in Livingston, Tennessee, asking questions about her. You can imagine how much in that small town would have caused
Yeah.
mouths to go. Anyway, then she was given a ticket to, I think it was Dallas. And then in Dallas, she was given another ticket to Albuquerque. And then from Albuquerque, given a ticket to Santa Fe. And then when she got into Santa Fe, someone came up to her and said, "Oh, you must be going up on the hill." She, knowing nothing about what was going on. Anyway, based upon her technical background, she was given the job of measuring particle tracks as a result of fission reactions. And so she spent most of her time looking through a microscope, measuring the small fission tracks that were produced when the accelerator reaction occurred. When she returned from Los Alamos to Livingston in 1946, no one was interested because everyone knew about Oak Ridge. If you didn't work at Oak Ridge, what did you do?
Yeah.
Because Los Alamos was still a secret city. Mm-hmm. And so she said she tried to tell people, but no one was interested, so she just stopped telling people.
Wow.
She did receive a letter of commendation from J. Robert Oppenheimer.
Wow.
And acknowledging her contributions to the development of the atomic bomb.
Wow, that's amazing.
Anyway, those are just some of the women that I've run into in my reading, and how they contributed significantly.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Doing really critical work on a lot of different aspects of the projects. After the war, did any of them go on to teaching positions in universities, or were they still kind of held back?
Leona Marshall Libby, I think, ended up working and teaching because her last husband was Walter Libby, who discovered C14. And I think, Edna Anderson went back. I think she went back to teach at University of Wisconsin.
Awesome. So, yeah. I think it's amazing. Yeah, because they had PhDs and, did a lot of critical work. So I think, it would only make sense for them to make it to the university level, at least for a few of them. So it's incredible, the amount of work that they contributed to. And it's just something you just don't hear about as much.
Yeah.
Because you have all the, the Nobel laureates that were around at that time in those places, and they kind of get all the shine. But it's great to hear about the contributions that they made as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for listening to the Rad Lab. Please, if you enjoyed it, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Spotify or anywhere you get your podcasts, and we will see you on the next one.